Hello, welcome to the live stream. We got some breaking news. Not only, of course, the Air India crash, what a horrible tragedy. So many lives lost. Apparently, there was one survivor. But even more importantly, there are several websites. Of course, the media and the websites do not have an official story yet. Nobody does. The Canadian news doesn't even have an official story. They're just going based off what they hear. But there's also several websites claiming that Dr. George Dudnot, who is an Indian Canadian doctor convicted of uh, raping unconscious sedated patients at his hospital in Toronto, as well as purposely infecting them with HIV, which, by the way, a lot of American tourists visit Toronto, and a lot of American tourists could have been patients at that Toronto hospital and given HIV and not aware of it. And also, Dr. George Dudnot, there are several websites claiming that he had bought a ticket. So I'm guessing, is this some sort of airline employee that leaked this information that Dr. George Dudnot had bought a ticket for that flight, that Indian flight, and then suddenly canceled that ticket? And perhaps that airline employee, right? Because I'm sure Dr. George Dudnot, since he was a convicted rapist, and even though he was released from prison, even though Dr. George Dudnot was released from Canadian prison early, I'm sure if he tries to get on a plane, he's still flagged, right? I mean, he's a convicted rapist. If a convicted rapist, especially someone who purposely infected his patients with HIV, a doctor, a Indian Canadian doctor who purposely infected his patients with HIV, and he's a convicted rapist. Even though he was let out of prison early, he's still a convicted rapist. And I'm sure, obviously, right, if he gets on a plane and that he's going to be flagged, like his name's going to be flagged as having criminal charges, as being a rapist, a convicted rapist, right, who was let out of prison early. And so I guess was it an airline employee? See, I'm trying to make sense of what these websites are saying. I think what they're getting at is it was an airline employee who stated that Dr. George Dudnot had purchased a ticket on the Air India flight and then canceled the ticket. When you have a really suspicious plane crash, you have to take everything into consideration. So when you have a convicted rapist, an Indian doctor who was convicted of raping patients and purposely giving them HIV, even though he was let out of prison early, the fact that he bought a ticket for this Air India flight and then canceled his ticket, and then suddenly the Air India flight went down and almost 300 people were killed. It's definitely circumstantial evidence. I mean, you have to take it in, you have to investigate all possible leads, right? I mean, he's a convicted rapist, Dr. George Dudnot. He raped patients, hospital patients, while they were sedated, unconscious. He purposely gave them HIV. And a lot of American tourists visit that Toronto hospital, and they could have been patients of Dr. George Dudnot and not even realize that they were given HIV by Dr. George Dudnot. So there could be a major HIV outbreak in the United States from the American tourists that visited Toronto. If they needed medical attention, they would have ended up at that Toronto hospital, and they could have been given HIV and not even realize it because Dr. George Dudnot's victims were unconscious, right? Some of them remembered something, but most unconscious victims don't remember anything. I mean, most people under anesthesiology, there's probably a lot more victims because most people who are under anesthesiology prior to surgery, who are sedated, unconscious, most people don't remember anything while they're under anesthesiology, while they're sedated, right, on the operating table. So it's very possible that there's a lot more victims, especially the American victims who don't realize that when they needed surgery, when they were American tourists in Toronto, Canada, when they were American tourists visiting Toronto, Canada, when they needed surgery, these American tourists became patients, American patients at the Toronto hospital where Dr. George Juna worked, and they could have been given HIV while they were unconscious, sedated prior to surgery. And there could be a major HIV outbreak in the United States. So now, this same Indian doctor who's a convicted rapist allegedly had purchased an airline ticket for this same Air India flight that went down and crashed, and he canceled the ticket. But still, it's kind of suspicious. What are the chances? What are the chances that a convicted rapist, an Indian doctor who's a convicted rapist, even though he was let out of Canadian prison early, and by the way, the judge, the Canadian judge, gave this Indian doctor like the minimum sentence because I guess Canadian judges go easy on convicted doctors who raped patients. I guess Canadian judges go easy on Indian doctors who are convicted of raping patients. So Dr. George Do Not only got like the minimum sentence, right? And so he was released from Canadian prison early. He's been out of prison for years. And then suddenly he goes to buy a ticket, right? Is this what the airline employee is alleging who leaked this information? So these several of these websites, right? They are saying that apparently, according to the websites, Dr. George Do Not had purchased a ticket for Air India flight, this same Air India flight that went down, okay? And he canceled his ticket. But what are the chances that a convicted rapist who is purchases a flight for the same flight that goes down, the Air India flight, right? And he cancels the ticket beforehand. It's circumstantial evidence. Like you have to investigate all possible leads. When when you have a serious investigation, especially something so suspicious and tragic and shocking as an Air India plane crash, you have to investigate all possible leads because they have right now there's no other real official story. I mean, they don't have anything else to go on at this point. So they have to investigate every possible lead. And it's very suspicious that a convicted rapist who was even convicted of purposely giving his patients HIV. He was a former doctor, anesthesiologist, who was convicted of raping patients while they were unconscious, sedated, under anesthesiology on the operating table. And then he goes to buy a plane ticket for the same Air India flight that goes down, but he happens to cancel the ticket and doesn't get on the plane. But he bought a ticket for the flight. I mean, he could have also been working together, right? I mean, I know you might say, oh, well, he just bought a ticket. That doesn't mean anything. But at the same time, it's circumstantial evidence because what if he was working with other people, right? 9/11 wasn't just one Muslim guy. 9/11 wasn't just one person. It was a whole operation of people, 9/11. The people who did 9/11 worked in a whole operation. So when it's little things like that, like little things like one person buying a plane ticket and then canceling the plane ticket for the exact same Air India flight that went down, that is suspicious. Okay? And now when people go look at 9/11, they can go look at the actions of every single person who was involved in 9/11. It was a whole team of people. It wasn't just one Muslim guy. It was a whole team. It was a whole operation, right? And then now people can look at the actions conducted. And when you look at those actions all together, they all add up. All of the actions add up. All of the actions of the people who did 9/11, they all add up, right? So now with this Air India flight, you have to look at everything, even small things like a former convicted rapist doctor who raped his own patients and purposely gave them HIV, buying a ticket for the same Air India flight that happens to go down, but then he canceled the ticket. Sure, it might be a coincidence. It could be a coincidence, but oftentimes it's also just because it could be a coincidence doesn't mean it is a coincidence. So that's why you need to do a proper investigation. You need to do a proper investigation to rule out all possible scenarios and all possible leads. And if it is a coincidence, then it can be shown as a coincidence through a proper investigation. But at this point, if you have, especially when you have nothing else to go on as to how this Air India flight crashed and went down, they should investigate this. They really should. And this is a tragedy. This is really scary. And I just want to say too, I am so scared of flying. Plane crashes are more common than people think. They really are. And unfortunately, it's really sad because with plane crashes, I mean, if you're in a car accident, the chances are probably higher that you'll survive. Although there's a lot of car accidents where they're like brutal, right? But if you're especially in a plane crash, right? What would you think that your chances would be better to survive a car accident or a plane crash? Well, I actually statistically can't really answer that question for sure, but if I were just to give my opinion and state my intuition and what my opinion is, I think most people would probably intuitively think that it would probably be easier to survive a car crash than a plane crash. If you had to choose between the two, if you know, if it was a choice between God forbid, having to survive a car crash or a plane crash, I think most people intuitively would think or guess that it would probably be easier to survive a car crash than a plane crash. But car crashes are very dangerous too. In fact, people might actually uh, s- make the claim that they think it's easier to survive a plane crash than a car crash because, car crashes can be pretty deadly as well. But you get what I'm saying. That's what I mean. Is like, so I just am a person who's afraid to fly. And also, it's not as even like you're not treated that well by these airlines. All of these people are always complaining the airlines loses their luggage, the airline employees are rude, the airline flight has terrible food. Even people complain about the movies on the airline flight. Is it like they can't even pick good movies on the airline flight? Like they have to. No, actually, well, that was I think about 20 years ago. Now, everyone I'm pretty sure can just watch whatever they want, right? On an air, because everyone has a laptop and a computer and a phone. So now everyone can just, right? Everyone. I haven't. I've never really, I just I've never really researched it. I've never researched how airlines have changed over the last 20 years, but I do know that people are generally speaking have a lot of complaints about the airline industry, Even the workers, even the airport even the airlines employees, right? They're constantly doing strikes and they're constantly claiming like workplace discrimination and all that stuff, and they're claiming racism and etc. So it's sad. And there's actually, I was watching a documentary that shows that there's actually still plane crashes from years ago that they never actually know for sure what happened. That must be so scary to not have closure, to not even know for sure what happened. Not only are you in a horrible disaster, plane crash, but then the investigative board can't even give a confirm can't even give 100% verifiable answer as to what exactly happened. That's pretty. That's awful. They try their best, of course. Of course, they try, right? I'm sure they try their best. But at the end of the day, there's several plane crashes that they still don't know. Like there's a lot of plane crashes in the past. I was watching a documentary, and apparently there's a lot of plane crashes where they can't give a for sure answer they can't say exactly for sure what caused the plane crash, why it went down. They don't even know for sure if they even found all the survivors, right? But after years pass, it's very unlikely that a person who, you know, was lost wouldn't have come forward at that point, right? So it's very crucial that people do a very thorough investigation. It's crucial that people take this seriously. This should be taken seriously, and you should investigate every possible lead. Okay. And intuitively, if you just were to use your intuition, you know that it's important to investigate every possible lead. And we've been shocked before. Like, look at 9/11. 9/11 was shocking. 9/11, the September 9/11. Um, the Boston Marathon event was shocking. COVID, the COVID pandemic was shocking. It's interesting when information comes out how people a lot of times in investigations people thought one thing and it turned out to be the opposite, right? And now let's get into the world of television, which television oftentimes it's fiction too, but it's also based on truth. I mean, a lot of television, even though a lot of those TV shows are fiction, they're based on truth. If you watch Law and Order SVU, if you watch Law and Order, if you watch those criminal TV shows, those Law and Order, CSI, CSI Miami, CSI New York, right? What typically do you notice when you watch the episode? The very first person they suspect, it's only like 50% of the time it turns out to be that was the person. Because you watch so many episodes of CSI and criminal law and order criminal intent where they suspect someone and it turns out to be totally opposite. Or even turns out to be the victim. The person who claimed to be the victim was actually the person who did it, right? So that's why it's so important to do a proper investigation because you can't just jump to conclusions, right? And say, oh, well, like they can't even say for sure it was an accident. They really can't. They can't say that it was just an accident. What it could have been terrorism. It really could have. You know, when 9/11 happened, people at first were trying to say, it was an accident. People thought it was an accident. They really did. I remember when 9/11 happened, a lot of people initially first were saying, "Oh, there was a plane accident, plane crash." And people didn't like fully link it to terrorism until the second plane hit the second tower. Until the second plane hit the second tower, that was the definitive moment in which people went from believing it was a plane crash, like just a plane crash accident, to the people believing it was full on terrorism, right? Because what are the chances that a second plane would accidentally crash into the twin towers, right? What are the chances, right? So obviously people were like, okay, this looks like terrorism. It's two planes now that crashed into the twin towers, right? So that's why it's important. You can't jump to conclusions, right? Even the media, even the official media. Well, there's no really official media. I mean, there's just the news like on the news channel, and even they say that they don't really know, right? They don't really know for sure. That everyone's still kind of asking questions. So, anyways, yeah. So I really hope I hope everyone figures out exactly what happened and everyone, if you do decide, to go flying and to take a plane, stay safe. Everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and they really need to do a proper investigation to figure out what happened with this Air India plane crash. And it's really tragic. It's a really tragic, and condolences to all the victims of the plane crash. God bless everyone and the families of the victims. God bless everyone. Condolences to the victims of the plane crash. It's really tragic. It's really sad. And everyone stay safe, stay healthy, and God bless everyone.